Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the National Youth Festival 2022. I am your host for this session, and my name is Bharat Jain. It's the 25th edition और आज इस यूथ फेस्टिवल का दूसरा दिन है. मैं आप सबको बता दूं कि नेशनल यूथ फेस्टिवल इज सेलिब्रेटेड टू ऑनर द आइडियल्स एंड थॉट्स of Swami Vivekananda, who had tremendous faith in youth. The festival aims to ignite and fuel the minds of young Indians by helping them connect with our roots and know our history right. And to do so, we have an interesting subject, indigenous and traditional wisdom, जो कि हमारे देश की यूनिक और हेरिटेज कैपिटल है. एंड हु बेटर टू एक्सप्लेन इट देन आवर प्रेजेंटर्स ऑफ दिस सेशन, जिनकी इंडियन हिस्ट्री की नॉलेज बेमिसाल है. Their books on India's lesser known history and heroes are monumental contributions to bringing to light the pieces of history that are unknown to the youth of India in the present times. And we have with us our first presenter of this session, who's an author, an academic, a historian, and whose book on Indian partition is remarkable. He's here to shed light on the theme for this session, India's lesser known histories and heroes. A stalwart of Indian history, please put your hands together and welcome none other than Sri Raghuvendra Tawar. We are joined by Sir, and I request Sir to kindly take over. Over to you, Sir. You may start presenting, Sir.
Good morning, my young friends from across India. It is a great pleasure to be joining this grand festival. I'm grateful to the organizers for having given me a chance to interact with the youth of India from across the country. The topic that I'm going to speak on today would be key issues in India's partition. Now, some of you must be wondering how is the story of India's partition a forgotten history? Briefly, let me suggest that this is one story that has been virtually kept out of the mainstream narrative of Indian history for different reasons. In the next about 40 minutes, I'll touch on some key issues. दोनों English और हिंदी में मैं बोलूँगा सुविधा के लिए. First, let me take you back to the fact. So I'll give you some statistics. Partition का क्या dimension है, इसको समझने के लिए बहुत जरूरी है इसकी basic statistics को समझना. ये देखिए आप कि लगभग 60 लाख यानी 6 मिलियन नॉन मुस्लिम्स यानी हिंदू, सिख और अन्य जो कम्युनिटीज हैं वो वेस्ट पाकिस्तान छोड़कर भारत आई 1947 में. लगभग 6.5 मिलियन यानी 65-70 लाख मुस्लिम भाई बहन भारत छोड़कर पाकिस्तान गए. इसी प्रकार से बंगाल को देखें अगर आप, तो लगभग 40 लाख नॉन मुस्लिम्स ने पूर्वी बंगाल यानी जो आज बांग्लादेश है, उस समय का ईस्ट बंगाल है, उसको छोड़कर वो भारत के बंगाल में आए. और यानी 10 लाख लगभग मुसलमान भारत छोड़कर उस समय के ईस्ट बंगाल में गए. ये एक माइग्रेशन का फिगर है. अब जहां तक पार्टीशन का महत्व है, इसको इतना इस विषय को हम लोग इतना क्यों महत्व देते हैं? अगर आप उस समय की जो वायलेंस को देखें, द स्टैटिस्टिक्स ऑफ वायलेंस आर सो इमेंस. It is estimated that over 750,000 people were killed in just a matter of few months in 1947. Some would go up to 1 million, some suggest even over a million. It is estimated that about 100,000 women were abducted, violated, and who were not traceable. This is the official figure. The figure of this could go into perhaps many times more. Now, this is one part. Partition is also important because when you study the basic issues, you see partition of India is something that did not enjoy mass support. It was a decision taken by a handful of people which did not enjoy mass support. More importantly, as I will explain in the course of this lecture, that the partition of India was against the basic psyche of India. India was not a divisible country. India has been one for thousands of years. Every scholar who has written on this has noted this, but we were divided on the basis of something that did not exist. Having said this, now I'll take you to some key issues. You know, the nature of violence, let me begin with that first. जो जिस प्रकार की मारकाट हुई, जिस प्रकार की हिंसा हुई, उसका विश्व इतिहास में कोई पैरेलल नहीं है. See, we have killings by dictators like the Nazis, you know, रूस में स्टालिन, चीन में माओ सेतुंग, इन लोगों ने लाखों, कहीं ज्यादा लोगों की हत्या के लिए जिम्मेवार थे, पर वहां स्टेट इन्वॉल्व था. तो विश्व के इतिहास में शांति के समय कभी भी दो कम्युनिटीज के बाद इतना, यू नो, कम्युनल वायलेंस में इतनी मारकाट नहीं हुई. दूसरा, यू नो, इस प्रकार की परिस्थिति बना दी गई 1947 में कि जो लोग सैकड़ों सालों से, हजारों सालों से एक जगह रह रहे थे, उनका वहां उस जगह में रहना असंभव हो गया. It became impossible for people to continue staying in the places of their origin and stay. और हत्या का जो रूप है वो भयंकर रूप है. I have done extensive studies. I spent 40 years studying the violence, the nature of violence across the world, you know, and it is unprecedented. किस प्रकार की ये हत्या है, किस प्रकार से छोटे छोटे बच्चों को हत्या की गई, तो एक unprecedented story है पार्टीशन का. Coming to a very important, perhaps the most important issue on partition is कि जिस आधार पर इस देश का विभाजन हुआ, the basis on which it was divided was flawed. ये इसके पीछे कोई लॉजिक नहीं थी, कोई रैशनल नहीं था. ये मानकर चला पार्टीशन का निर्णय कि हिंदू मुसलमान दो राष्ट्र हैं. इतिहास इस बात को साबित नहीं करता है. हिंदू मुस्लिम्स वर नॉट टू नेशंस इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ इंडिया. यू सी, ये एक इलिटिस्ट, एक उच्च वर्ग की लीडरशिप का निर्णय है. सामान्य व्यक्ति, चाहे वो हिंदू हो चाहे वो मुसलमान हो, मैंने अपनी स्टडीज में स्टैब्लिश किया है, मेरी प्रसिद्ध जो अच्छी किताबें चली हैं, मैंने स्टैब्लिश किया है कि सामान्य ना हिंदू ना मुसलमान पार्टीशन नहीं चाहता था 1947 में. अब मैं आपको उदाहरण देता हूं छोटा सा एक, यू नो, स्मॉल एग्जांपल. देयर आर 29 डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स इन पंजाब एंड प्री 47 पंजाब. एक भी गांव पंजाब का ऐसा, नॉट अ सिंगल विलेज इन पंजाब हैड अ सिंगल मेजॉरिटी. हर गांव में आपको हिंदू भी मिलते थे, मुसलमान भी मिलते थे, सिख भी मिलते थे. एक कॉस्मोपॉलिट, इसी प्रकार से बंगाल की है सिचुएशन. सो ये समझना बहुत जरूरी है कि इंडिया का जो पार्टीशन हुआ वो एक अननेचुरल घटना थी. वो जनमानस के ओपिनियन के विरुद्ध घटना थी. उसका इन्वॉल्वमेंट नहीं था. द कॉमन मासेस वर नॉट इन्वॉल्व्ड इन दिस डिसीजन. This is a fundamental concept that people who read partition or study partition or want to know about partition should understand. It was not a decision taken by the common people of India. It was basically, next issue that you must understand, जो अगली बात है वो है कि पार्टीशन का जो कॉन्सेप्ट है वो सामान्य व्यक्तियों को ये कहकर समझाया गया कि ये तो टेम्पररी मेजर है, ये तो जल्दी वापस हो जाएगा. यू नो, ये एक बहुत फंडामेंटल चीज है समझना कि बहुत से लोग अपने घरों से निकले नहीं, बहुत से लोग अपने घरों में बैठे रहे क्योंकि उनको ये बताया जा रहा था कि यू नीड नॉट वरी, इट्स ओनली अ टेम्पररी मेजर, यू मे और मे नॉट शिफ्ट. तो द रिजल्ट वाज दैट पीपल डिड नॉट शिफ्ट फ्रॉम देयर हाउसेज. जब वायलेंस बढ़ने लगा, कुछ लोग तो घंटों की नोटिस में अपना गांव, शहर, अपनी दुकानें, घर, अपनी जमीन को छोड़कर निकलते हैं. तो ये इसलिए हुआ, इनफैक्ट ये वायलेंस का कारण भी यही है क्योंकि लोगों को ये कहा गया कि नथिंग इज गोइंग टू हैपन, आप बैठिए, सब ठीक ठाक हो जाएगा, और हुआ उल्टा. यू नो, आई विल गिव यू एन एग्जांपल. ऑन 3rd-4th June देयर इज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस इन न्यू दिल्ली. इस प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस की अध्यक्षता प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस वाइसरॉय लॉर्ड माउंटबेटन कर रहे हैं. उनसे एक पत्रकार ने पूछा कि क्या आप अनुमान लगा रहे हैं कि हिंदू उधर से आएंगे और मुसलमान यहां से जाएंगे या सिख आएंगे जाएंगे, यू नो, ये विल देयर बी एन एक्सचेंज ऑफ पॉपुलेशन? यू विल बी सरप्राइज्ड टू नो दैट द वाइसरॉय ऑफ इंडिया, ये 4th जून है, अभी पार्टीशन का मारकाट शुरू हो चुका है पर इतना नहीं है. वो जवाब देते हैं कि नहीं, हम तो ये अनुमान लगा रहे हैं कि कुछ हजार लोग इधर से उधर हो जाएंगे, इसके अतिरिक्त हमें किसी की अपेक्षा नहीं है, कोई इधर से उधर नहीं जाएगा. और अगले 3 महीनों में आप देखते हैं लगभग 15-16 मिलियन लोग, 1.5-2 करोड़ लोग इधर से उधर होते हैं। तो सरकार की तैयारी का प्रश्न यहाँ आप देखिए कि सरकार अनुमान लगा रही है कोई माइग्रेशन नहीं होगा। इसका जो भार है, इसका भार आप अंदाजा लगा सकते हैं कि लोगों पर पड़ा। पार्टीशन का माइग्रेशन के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में आपको यह भी ध्यान रखना है कि इसकी सही कीमत सामान्य वर्ग ने चुकाई। 90% जो वायलेंस होता है, 90% जो मारकाट हत्याएं होती हैं, वो सामान्य छोटे किसानों की, छोटे दुकानदारों की, छोटे व्यापारियों की, जो सामान्य वर्ग है, जो जिसका मकसद जीवन में जीना है, अपने कमाई करना, रोजी करना, और उस प्रकार के लोगों की ये कीमत उनको चुकानी पड़ती है। तो ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है समझना कि पार्टीशन के अंदर जो मूल ढांचा, गांधी जी तो बार बार ये कहते थे कि पार्टीशन, गांधी जी तो कहते कहते चले गए ये बात कि पार्टीशन की असली कीमत तो सामान्य वर्ग ने चुकाई है, गरीब तबके ने चुकाई है, जो मजदूर तबका है, खेतों में काम करता है, छोटे छोटे व्यापार करता है। तो जैसे मैंने आपको बताया कि पार्टीशन के पीछे कोई जनरल कंसेंसस नहीं था। आप ये जानकर हैरान होंगे कि कोई भी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल बॉडी ने पार्टीशन, भारत के विभाजन की चर्चा नहीं की है। ऑल इंडिया कांग्रेस कमेटी की मीटिंग होती है 14 जून 1947 को। उस समय ऑल इंडिया कांग्रेस कमेटी के 400 सदस्य थे। उन सदस्यों में से लगभग 200 लोग उस दिन उपस्थित थे जब यह निर्णय लिया गया, और उसमें भी विभाजन था। अगर आप उस जमाने के इतिहास को देखें तो पार्टीशन को कंसेंसस प्राप्त नहीं था। ये मैं स्पष्ट रूप से आपको समझाना चाहता हूं। पार्टीशन डिड नॉट एंजॉय द सपोर्ट, पॉलिटिकल सपोर्ट across party lines, even within the predominant party, ruling party तो नहीं कहूंगा, predominant political party which was the Indian National Congress, उसके बीच में भी मतभेद था, उसके बीच में भी विवाद था। बड़े बड़े लीडर्स ने अपोज किया, डॉक्टर राम मनोहर लोहिया अपोज करते हैं, जयप्रकाश नारायण अपोज, और अनेक, विनायक सावरकर अपोज करते हैं। तो ये बहुत से लोग जिनका ऑपोजिशन है पार्लियामेंट, ऑपोजिशन पार्टीशन के प्रति, तो उनके बयान आप देखें तो ये नहीं। बेसिकली द पॉइंट इज दैट पार्टीशन डिड नॉट एंजॉय पॉलिटिकल सपोर्ट, डिड नॉट एंजॉय मास कंसेंसस। इट वाज एन एलिटिस्ट आइडिया. It was an idea based on the thinking of a small group of people who are controlling the entire system. So एक बहुत अच्छी स्टोरी इन दिनों में आती है। वो उसने कहा कि अगर हमने पार्टीशन को हिंदू मुसलमान के आधार पर अगर हमने इसको स्वीकार कर लिया तो कल एक गलत परंपरा स्टार्ट हो जाएगी कि अगर आपने कहीं इतिहास के दौर में अगर आपने अपना धर्म बदल लिया, इफ यू चेंज योर फेथ यू चेंज योर नेशनैलिटी, which was ridiculous. So we actually landed up allowing people to change their nationality because at some time in history they had become Muslim or they had become something else. So this was a basic flaw in in the whole concept of party. So there is extensive criticism. अगर आप उस जमाने के रिकॉर्ड्स को देखिए, जैसे मैंने बताया, मैंने 40-30 साल पहले शुरू किया काम इस पर, अनेक लेख लिखे, किताबें लिखी इस पर। उस जमाने में आपको भरमार इसकी ऑपोजिशन मिलती है, एक्सटेंसिव क्रिटिसिज्म मिलती है। फ्रीडम फाइटर्स कर रहे हैं, उस जमाने के रेवोल्यूशनरी जो बचे हैं लीडर्स वो कर रहे हैं, एडिटोरियल्स कर रहे हैं, पॉलिटिकल लीडरशिप कर रही है। यानी पार्टीशन एंजॉयज अ ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ ऑपोजिशन। द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ पार्टीशन इज एंजॉयिंग अ ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ, फॉर एग्जांपल मैं उदाहरण आपको देता हूं, प्रसिद्ध क्रांतिकारी जो रेवोल्यूशनरी हमारे हीरो रहे अजीत सिंह, वो पंजाब में रहते हैं, उस समय डलहौजी में रहते हैं। एक जगह लिखते हैं, द चैंपियंस ऑफ पार्टीशन विल नॉट एस्केप कंडेमनेशन इन हिस्ट्री। यानी अर्थात जो लोग जिन्होंने पार्टीशन का प्रस्ताव किया वो लोग इतिहास में अपनी क्रिटिसिज्म, आलोचना से नहीं बच पाएंगे। एक जगह और एक बड़े प्रसिद्ध क्रांतिकारी लिखते हैं, वी एक्यूज दोज, जिन लोगों ने इस पार्टीशन को किया है, एक एडिटोरियल लिखता है, जिन लोगों ने इस पार्टीशन के प्रस्ताव को आगे बढ़ाया है हम उनको कंडेम करते हैं। तो इस प्रकार के हमें बहुत सी आलोचना क्रॉस जनरेशन हमें मिलती है इस पार्टीशन के कॉन्सेप्ट की। नाउ नेक्स्ट पॉइंट आई वांट टू ब्रिंग टू योर नोटिस, ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात मेरे मन में जो आती है और जो आपसे शेयर करना चाहता हूं यहां में। अब 1947 में हमारा विभाजन हुआ, 1945 में दूसरा विश्व युद्ध समाप्त हुआ। अब दूसरे विश्व युद्ध के पश्चात अगर आप ब्रिटेन को देखें, इंग्लैंड, जिन लोगों को जैसी, ये तो वो व्यवस्था हो गई कि हमने इंग्लैंड को 200, हमने पिछले 60-70 साल से हम इंग्लैंड के खिलाफ हम युद्ध करते रहे, क्रांतिकारी अपना हम उनको यहां से भगाने में लगे रहे। आ स्ट्रगल फॉर फ्रीडम, हमारी जो आजादी का संघर्ष जो हम मना रहे हैं इस साल, आजादी का अमृत महोत्सव, इसकी कहानी क्या है? इसकी कहानी यह है कि अंग्रेजों ने आकर हमारे यहाँ हमारा बहुत नुकसान किया, हमारे देश को बर्बाद किया, हमारी आर्थिक व्यवस्था तबाह की, हमारी सामाजिक, हमारी धार्मिक व्यवस्था को तहस नहस किया, और हमें इनको यहां से निकालना है। और ये निकालने के लिए अनेक लोगों ने शहीद हुए, 20-20 साल 18-18 साल के युवा बच्चे जो हैं फांसी चढ़ गए जाकर आजादी के लिए। क्रांतिकारियों का जीवन आप देखिए, इतना लंबा आंदोलन चला, किस लिए चला? कि अंग्रेजों को हमने यहां से निकालना है, क्योंकि अंग्रेजों ने हमारा बहुत नुकसान किया है। अब आ जाइए आप 1940s में। 1945 में दूसरे विश्व युद्ध के बाद इंग्लैंड की क्या परिस्थिति है? इंग्लैंड पर 3000 मिलियन पाउंड का कर्ज है। इंग्लैंड, यूनाइटेड किंगडम जो है वो तब तहस नहस, जैसे सारा यूरोप, सारी उपनिवेशवादी ताकतें जो जमाने की हैं, स्पेन, पोर्चुगल, फ्रांस, इंग्लैंड, डच, सबके सब तहस नहस हो चुके हैं दूसरे विश्व युद्ध के बाद। और हम क्या करते हैं कि इंग्लैंड को कहते हैं आइए हमारा भविष्य तय कीजिए आप। ये एक बहुत क्रिटिकल बात है। I have never been able to understand why we allowed the British to sit on judgment. गांधी जी भी कहते थे कि हम अपने विभाजन की हम स्वयं करें तो करें, बाहर का आदमी कैसे हमारा विभाजन कर सकता है? हमने ये किया, हमने उनको अनुमति दी भारत का विभाजन। अंग्रेज अफसर ने आकर हमारा विभाजन की लाइनें बनाई, अंग्रेज अफसरों ने यहां तय किया। तो ये एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बात समझना है कि भारत के विभाजन अगर हम स्वयं करते तो करते, अंग्रेजों की तो नीति ही ये थी। इसी इंडिया की, भारत की जो एक कहें ऐतिहासिक जो परंपरा है, वो डाइवर्सिटी में यूनिटी है, हमारी विविधता में एकता है। हम लोग अलग अलग भाषाएं बोलते हैं, अलग अलग धर्म, हम वस्त्र पहनते हैं, खाना खाते हैं, हमारी कल्चरल ट्रेडिशंस अलग हैं, पर मूल रूप से हिमालय से लेकर और ये मैं नहीं कह रही, श्री अरबिंदो ने कहा 1905 में, श्री अरबिंदो का एक लेख है कि इंडिया इज कल्चरली, रिलीजियसली, सोशली इट इज वन, वी मे बी पोलिटिकली सेपरेटेड, अलग अलग रियासतें हो सकती हैं, कि भारत की आत्मा एक है। और आज से नहीं, ये तो कई हजार साल से है। हिमालय से लेकर भारत के महासागरों तक जो है, ये भारत जितने लोग बीच में रहते हैं, आप नोट करते होंगे, आप किसी भी देश के किसी भी भाग में रहिए, मैं हरियाणा में रहता हूं, दिल्ली आसपास, और मैं दक्षिण में जाऊं, किसी तमिलनाडु के गांव में जाऊं, तो मुझे आउट ऑफ प्लेस नहीं फील करूंगा। भाषा की थोड़ी दिक्कत आ सकती है, परंतु मूल रूप से जो वहां जिनसे मैं मिलूं, इसी प्रकार से दक्षिण शंकराचार्य का अंदाजा लगाइए आप, कितने जमाना पहले वहां से चलकर श्रीनगर गए। तो ये भारत की परंपरा थी, इधर उधर से घूमते रहते थे, इधर आते थे। सो ये ऐसे देश को ये मानना कि क्योंकि किसी समय में दो धर्म बन गए हैं, या दो एक प्रमुख धर्म और उठ गया है 400-500 साल के अंदर, मुस्लिम्स हैव बीन एन इंटीग्रल पार्ट ऑफ इंडिया। मुसलमानों को आप भारत से अलग कैसे मान सकते हैं? कभी अलग उन्होंने अपने आप को समझा नहीं था। तो अंग्रेजों ने कैसे माना कि हिंदू मुसलमान दो राष्ट्र हैं? तो ये बात समझना बहुत जरूरी है कि इंडिया एंड द डिवीजन ऑफ इंडिया बाय द ब्रिटिश वाज इनेटली फ्लॉड। ये बहुत बड़ी गलती हुई कि हमने उन लोगों को अपना भविष्य तय करने की अनुमति दी जिन लोगों के साथ हमने इतना लंबा संघर्ष किया। तो यू मस्ट अंडरस्टैंड दिस। सी, भारत को विभाजन करना उस जमाने की शीत युद्ध, जो यंगस्टर्स, जो स्टूडेंट शीत युद्ध के कॉन्सेप्ट नहीं जानते, मेरी बात लंबी हो जाएगी पर एक सेकंड में समझाता हूं। 1945 के बाद विश्व दो गुटों में बट गया। एक गुट, द अमेरिकन पोलराइज्ड वर्ल्ड, द अदर द कम्युनिस्ट पोलराइज्ड वर्ल्ड। तो ये दोनों गुट जो है सारे विश्व को अपनी जागीर समझकर इसको छोटे छोटे भागों में अपनी मर्जी से निर्णय लेने लगे। तो भारत का विभाजन करना, फ्रेगमेंटेशन करना भी इस शीत युद्ध का एक तरह से हिस्सा था। ये जैसे मैंने बताया आपको कि फ्रीडम मूवमेंट के विरुद्ध थी ये भावना, पार्टीशन की भावना सारे फ्रीडम मूवमेंट के विरुद्ध थी। फ्रीडम मूवमेंट सारे देश में इकट्ठा चली है, सारे देश में अंग्रेजों के विरुद्ध आवाज उठी है। उसके बाद भी हमने उनको अपना विभाजन करने की अनुमति दे दी। एक बहुत बड़ी गलती हुई और मूल रूप से इसके लॉर्ड माउंटबेटन काफी हद तक जिम्मेवार हैं इसके। और अगर आप आखिरी सालों में देखें, आखिरी महीनों में देखें, तो एक अजीब सा दोस्ती बन जाती है लीडरशिप के बीच में और अंग्रेजों के बीच में। वो मैं इसको हमारे कॉन्टेक्स्ट से बात बाहर हो जाएगी थोड़ा सा, बट यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड that the British are deeply involved in our decision making process, in the whole system that is managing the country from the time that Lord Mountbatten comes in March 14th को वो आते हैं। उसके बाद हर निर्णय लॉर्ड माउंटबेटन की स्वीकृति से होता है। अंग्रेजों का सिर्फ हमारे पार्टीशन से समस्या का संबंध नहीं है। The British were also greatly responsible for what happened in Kashmir. I have got a recent book on Kashmir and I have established in that all major decisions, whether it was ceasefire, whether it was the decision to go to the United Nations, whether it was the decision to announce a plebiscite, हर निर्णय का, इन सब निर्णयों का अंग्रेजों की, विशेषकर वहां के उनके वाइसरॉय लॉर्ड माउंटबेटन का हाथ था। हमारे डिसीजन मेकिंग को इन्फ्लुएंस करने के लिए। तो ये चीज हमें ध्यान में रखनी है। यहाँ अनेक रिकॉर्ड्स ये बताते हैं कि उदाहरण के लिए मैं आपको बताऊं कि लॉर्ड माउंटबैटन 10 महीने, यू सी व्हेन ही स्टेज, ही कम्स इन मार्च 14 and he goes back, he leaves the country in 48 June. So in this duration he writes, एक जगह उन्होंने अपने लेक्चर में कहा, मैं हैरान हो गया हूं इस देश से, इस देश ने इतना लंबा संघर्ष हमारे खिलाफ किया, मैं तो 10 महीने से यहाँ भोज ही अटेंड करते रहा। He is repeatedly attending functions, farewells, dinners, we are honoring them, you know, this is the kind of environment that is prevailing. Now you see, it is very important to understand this why this anarchy, ये प्रश्न बार बार उठता है, इतनी अराजकता क्यों हुई? अराजकता के पीछे ही वायलेंस था। अगर आप उस जमाने के नोट्स को, रिकॉर्ड्स को देखें तो उस जमाने की जो प्रमुख अंग्रेज अफसर हैं, जो पंजाब में विशेषकर इवन जेनकिंस यहाँ के गवर्नर हैं, और ये कहते हैं कि अगर आज की तिथि में आपने बिना तैयारी करे अगर आपने ये विभाजन किया, पार्टीशन किया, तो ये एक बहुत बड़ी मारकाट की संभावना अपने साथ लेकर आएगा। ये उनके अनेक हमारे पास लेख हैं, इन्हें अनेक हमारे पास नोट्स हैं, पर सरकार ने नहीं मानी। यू नो, एक प्रश्न ये भी उठता है कि अंग्रेज पहले भारत छोड़कर they first they announced that they would leave in 48, suddenly it was preponed. यू नो, ये भी एक प्रश्न बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है समझना, जो यंगस्टर्स तो शायद इसको नहीं जानते होंगे इस बात को, कि अंग्रेजों ने पहले घोषणा करी थी फरवरी 1947 में कि हम भारत जुलाई 48 तक छोड़ेंगे। 47 की बात नहीं थी। मई 1947 में सिमला में एक लीडर मिलते हैं, कृष्णा मेनन जिनका नाम है, वाइस रॉय से मिलते हैं। वाइस रॉय कहते हैं उनको कि अगर आप कॉमनवेल्थ का हिस्सा बन जाएं तो हो सकता है हम आपको डोमिनेंट स्टेटस पहले दे दें। कृष्णा मेनन कहते हैं कि चलिए, मैं दिस इज हाउ द आइडिया ओरिजिनेट्स, जस्ट प्रीपोनिंग, एक साल पहले प्रीपोन कर भारत और अंग्रेजों का यहाँ छोड़ना, जिसकी तैयारी नहीं थी, पता नहीं था इसको। एक साल पहले अगर आप प्रीपोन करते हैं तो कौन करेगा? तो अंग्रेज अफसर जो पोस्टेड हैं फील्ड में, वो कहते हैं कि इतनी जल्दी तैयारी नहीं हो सकती। तो उसका कारण, प्रमुख परिणाम उसका ये हुआ कि भारत के अंदर जो विशेषकर जो पार्टीशन प्रोविंसेस हैं, पंजाब है, दिल्ली है, वेस्टर्न उत्तर प्रदेश है, बंगाल तो है ही, तो अराजकता है। तो अराजकता के पीछे इसलिए कारण ये था कि ये तैयारी नहीं की गई। तैयारी क्यों नहीं की गई? क्योंकि समय नहीं दिया गया। समय क्यों नहीं दिया गया? क्योंकि कांग्रेस लीडरशिप भी तैयार होगी कि अगर आप हम एक साल पहले राजतंत्र संभाल देते हैं, डोमिनियन, हम कॉमनवेल्थ का हिस्सा भी बन जाएंगे, आप एक साल पहले ही चले जाइए। किसी ने ये नहीं देखा कि इतना बड़ा निर्णय होने जा रहा है, इसकी तैयारी कौन करेगा? तो एनार्की का प्रमुख कारण है कि प्लानिंग नहीं थी। प्लानिंग तो मैंने आपको उदाहरण दिया कि प्लानिंग की तो ये बात थी कि जो पार्टीशन के अंदर जितना जिस आधार पर, जितनी संख्या में जो लोगों का इधर से उधर आना जाना हुआ, उसको अगर आप देखें तो उसकी कोई प्लानिंग नहीं है। I told you कि 4 जून वाली प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में the viceroy was asked a question that will there be migration? He said no, there will be no migration. The result is, and the result of course you know, the government is believing there will be no migration. Obviously there was no planning, and when there was no plan, you see, first meeting, आपको आश्चर्य होगा, आपको शॉक होगा इस जानकर that the first meeting for the exchange of population takes place on 5th September. Can you imagine? 15 million people are crossing sides by the 5th of September 1947. Many millions have already crossed. The first meeting to arrange the exchange of population takes place on the 5th of September. So you can imagine the kind of anarchy, imagine the kind of complete अराजकता है। कोई अपने जगह पर काम नहीं कर रहा, पुलिस अफसर अपनी जगह पे नहीं है। आपको छोटा सा उदाहरण मैं देता हूं। पंजाब के गवर्नर है उस समय चंदूलाल त्रिवेदी। चंदूलाल त्रिवेदी, शिमला में उनका कार्यालय है। वो अपने जलंधर के ऑफिस के अंदर एक टेलीफोन का प्रबंध करना चाहते हैं। पंजाब के गवर्नर को 3 दिन लग गए टेलीफोन का अरेंज करने के लिए। ही कुड नॉट गेट अ टेलीफोन कनेक्शन। डिप्टी कमिश्नर्स को ऑर्डर कैसे पास किया करते थे? ऑल इंडिया रेडियो से। ऑल इंडिया रेडियो से ऑर्डर्स पास करते थे कि ये काम करना। इस व्यवस्था में पंजाब का विभाजन हुआ, बंगाल का विभाजन हुआ। तो आप यहां से अंदाजा लगा सकते हैं। अनेक लोग कहते हैं, एक उस जमाने में एक स्टेट्समैन पेपर है, उसके अंग्रेज एडिटर हैं, उनका बयान अगर आप पढ़े, वो कहते हैं कि मैं अपने जीवन में मैंने कभी इतना मूर्खता नहीं देखी जितना मैं ये पार्टीशन के विषय पर देख रहा हूं। अनेक लोग लिखते हैं, मैंने आपको स्टेट्समैन के एडिटर का आई एम स्टीफेंस का उदाहरण इसलिए देखा, मैंने इस आई एम स्टीफेंस के पेपर्स को स्टडी किया है कैम्ब्रिज के अंदर, और वो कहते हैं इन माय होल लाइफ आई वाज नॉट मोर शॉक्ड देन व्हाट आई सॉ इन द प्रोसेस ऑफ पार्टीशन। तो इस प्रकार का ये एक परिस्थिति है, डिसीजन टू पोस्टपोन, जैसे मैंने बताया। इसी it is very important for young students who are attending this conference across the nation to understand that the concept of partition, that the decision to partition India is something that was taken at a private and a personal level. You see, by private and public, एक निजी सा, जैसे चार दोस्त इकट्ठा बैठे, 10 लोग इकट्ठा बैठे, चलो ये विभाजन की कल्पना है, क्योंकि ये बार बार हर जगह से ही आता है, हर जगह पर्दे के पीछे निर्णय हो रहे हैं, हर जगह गुप्त मीटिंग्स हो रही है। इसी अगर आप छोटा सा निर्णय भी करें तो जनमत बने, कुछ ना कुछ एक मत तो पैदा हो ना उसका। हमने तो देश को ही विभाजित कर दिया, हमने इतना हजारों सैकड़ों साल से जो देश इकट्ठा है, जो लोग इकट्ठा थे, इसी आपने बिना किसी जनमत के बनाए, एक पर्सनल एंड प्राइवेट लेवल पर एक बिहाइंड द कर्टन वाली बात हुई, हर जगह गुप्त मीटिंग्स हो रही हैं। इस और गांधी जी ऑफ कोर्स वाज, गांधी जी का अगर आप 14 जून वाली मीटिंग का, डॉक्टर राममनोहर 14 जून जो एआईसीसी की मीटिंग है, डॉक्टर लोहिया ने उसका एक पूरा बयान छोड़ा है उस पर। उस मीटिंग में गांधी जी ने पूछा प्रश्न उठकर कि भाई मेरे से तुमने पूछा क्यों नहीं, आज आप स्वीकृति के लिए कांग्रेस पार्टी की लीडरशिप के अंदर लेकर आए हो, आपने मेरे से क्यों नहीं पूछा ये। माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी उस समय, जो जवाहरलाल नेहरू जी जो भावी प्रधानमंत्री बनने वाले हैं देश के, वो कहते हैं कि नहीं बापू, हमने आपसे पूछा था। गांधी जी कहते हैं नहीं पूछा। उस पर जवाहरलाल जी कहते हैं कि नहीं, आप दूर थे, टेलीफोन की आवाज साफ नहीं थी। इस प्रकार से तो निर्णय हुआ। लोहिया जी ने द गिल्टी मैन ऑफ इंडियाज पार्टीशन, ही हैज डेल्ट विद दिस एपिसोड इन डिटेल। गांधी जी मीटिंग छोड़कर चले जाते हैं और फिर उनको मुश्किल से बनाकर लाए। इस प्रकार से ये निर्णय की स्वीकृति हुई है। ये समझना बहुत जरूरी, जैसे मैंने कहा कि मूल डिसीजन, मूल जो निर्णय हैं वो सारे के सारे बड़े गुप्त ढंग से हो रहे हैं और एक अंडरस्टेटेड मैनर में ये किया जा रहा है। मैं आपको छोटा सा एक उदाहरण देता हूं अपनी बात को आगे बढ़ाते हुए कि जब पीक वायलेंस हो गया तो पाकिस्तान के प्राइम मिनिस्टर ऑफ पाकिस्तान लियाकत अली एंड द प्राइम मिनिस्टर ऑफ इंडिया जवाहरलाल जी, दे डिसाइड टू ऑर्गेनाइज अ जॉइंट टूर। वो इकट्ठा मिलकर एक शांति अपील करने के लिए पंजाब में जाते हैं। लाहौर से वो जा रहे हैं मोंटगोमरी की तरफ, और रास्ते में जो उस जमाने का सबसे बड़ा रिकॉर्डेड एक काफिला था, 30-40 किलोमीटर लंबा, लाखों लोग उस काफिले में हैं, ज्यादातर अधिकतर सिख हैं जो लालपुर आदि से आ रहे हैं, और बहुत मारकाट उस एरिया में हुई है। तो दोनों प्रधानमंत्री का काफिला सड़क के एक तरफ खड़ा है, और इसकी रिपोर्टिंग किसने करी? दुर्गा दास, जो बाद में हिंदुस्तान टाइम्स के रिपोर्टर बनते हैं। दुर्गा दास उन्होंने अपनी रिपोर्ट में लिखा कि मैं भी इस काफिले के साथ था, प्रधानमंत्री जी के टूर को मैं कवर कर रहा था, और नेहरू जी से रहा नहीं गया, वो उड़ती हुई मिट्टी के बीच में, धूल के बीच में उन्होंने सड़क क्रॉस कर और वो काफिले की ओर गए। इसी में ये किस्सा आपको क्यों बता रहा हूं, ताकि आपको एहसास हो जाए कि वहां जो एक सामान्य व्यक्ति है, सामान्य जनता है, उसके मन में पार्टीशन के विरुद्ध क्या भावनाएं हैं। जवाहरलाल जी ने एक महिला से पूछा कि आप कहां से आ रहे हैं। उस महिला ने जिस प्रकार से उसका रिएक्शन था, दुर्गादास लिखते हैं, किसी व्यक्ति ने उस काफिले में इन दोनों प्रधानमंत्रियों की ओर मुड़कर नहीं देखा। आप अनुमान लगाइए कितना गुस्सा होगा। दो प्रधानमंत्री खड़े हो, उनके साथ पूरा काफिला हो, और किसान भाई जो गुजर रहे हैं वहां से, और वो दोनों इधर मुड़कर भी ना देखे। They did not even recognize. The impression was, Durgadas writes, that the lady answered the Prime Minister Nehru as if she had not recognized him. He says she did not answer his query. She said, "जे तू करना ही सी," in Punjabi I'm quoting this, "जे तू करना ही सी ते दस्या क्यों नहीं?" The lady is questioning Jawaharlal Nehru, a man like of his stature, of his persona, and telling him, if you had to partition us, why did you not tell us in time? So this is the essence of partition. This is the essence of the feeling of the common person, how badly they were hit. So this is the kind of impression we have about partition, and he is left speechless. फिर आगे दुर्गादास लिखते हैं कि लियाकत अली जो पीछे रह गए थे, for a few minutes जवाहरलाल जी stand shocked. He was left speechless. वो बोल नहीं पाए और खड़े रहे, सुन होकर खड़े रहे। लियाकत अली ने रोड को क्रॉस किया, जवाहरलाल जी का हाथ पकड़कर वापस काफिले की ओर लेकर गए। तो ये मैंने आपको ये इसलिए बताया कि यू शुड अंडरस्टैंड द साइकी ऑफ द पीपल इन 1947। ये लोग जा कहां रहे हैं? ये लोग रिफ्यूजी कैंप्स हैं। थोड़ा 2 मिनट में आपको रिफ्यूजी कैंप्स की भी बात बताऊं। भारत का सबसे बड़ा रिफ्यूजी कैंप उस शहर में बनाया गया जहां मैं रहता हूं, कुरुक्षेत्र में। इन रिफ्यूजी कैंप्स में की जो कहानियां हैं हमें अनेक रूपों से मिलती हैं। पहले लोग छोटे रिफ्यूजी कैंप में आते थे, फिर बड़े में जाते थे, और फिर कई कई कुरुक्षेत्र वाला रिफ्यूजी कैंप तो लगभग 4 साल तक चलता रहा। रिफ्यूजी कैंप से जो लोग निकलकर सीट पंजाब में हुआ क्या कि मान लीजिए कि आपके पास 20 एकड़ जमीन थी पंजाब में, वेस्ट पंजाब में, आपको यहाँ 5 एकड़ मिलनी है, 10 मिलनी, कहाँ वो मिलनी है, किस व्यवस्था की जमीन मिलनी है, उसमें पानी है नहीं है। तो वी हैव अ पीरियड। ये जो रीसेटलमेंट एक्सरसाइज है ये भयंकर भ्रष्टाचारी की कहानी है। अगर उस जमाने के, अगर आप वही रिकॉर्ड्स पर मैं आता हूं, 2 नवंबर को पंजाब लेजिस्लेटिव असेंबली की मीटिंग होती है शिमला में, जो पंजाब, जो हमारी विधानसभा है, नई विधानसभा, ईस्ट पंजाब विधानसभा मिलती है, उस विधानसभा की रिपोर्टिंग ट्रिब्यून कर रहा है। वो कहता है कि विधानसभा के अंदर जो चार्जेस हो रहे हैं, जो एक दूसरे पर जो जो कहा जा रहा है कि ये तो इतनी भ्रष्टाचारी की चर्चा है, विधानसभा के पटल पर ये चार्ज लग रहे हैं कि उस मंत्री ने वहां कब्जा किया, उस मंत्री ने ये किया। यानी मूल रूप से इट इज एन एज ऑफ करप्शन, एन एज ऑफ एनार्की। ये समझना बहुत जरूरी है। 47-48 में आप अंदाजा नहीं लगा सकते कि कितनी भरमार करप्शन है प्रॉपर्टीज को हासिल करने में। जिन लोगों को प्रॉपर्टी नहीं भी मिल रही थी, जिनकी प्रॉपर्टी नहीं भी वो गुमा के आए थे, उन लोगों को भी शिमला में फॉर एग्जांपल रूल ये था कि अगर आपकी लाहौर अनारकली में एक दुकान है तो आपको दिल्ली में या शिमला में एक दुकान मिलेगी। हमारे पास ऐसे उदाहरण हैं जिन लोगों को 3-3 दुकानें मिली। किसी छोटे परिवार को अगर अच्छी जमीन मिल गई, उसकी जमीन किसी और ने हड़प लिया कर। ये अनेक कहानियां भरी पड़ी हैं रिकॉर्ड में उस जमाने की। अपनी बात को थोड़ा अंत की ओर ले जाते हुए मैं आपको थोड़ा सा 2 मिनट में विमेन की बात करना चाहता हूं। यहां पार्टीशन का अगर आप सही रूप से देखें तो जो असली जो 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 डीप इंपैक्ट है वो हमारी महिलाओं पर, हमारी बहनों पर, हमारी माताओं पर पड़ा। पार्टीशन का असली कीमत इन महिलाओं ने चुकाई है। काउंटलेस अदर स्टोरीज, अनबिलीवेबल स्टोरीज हैं इन महिलाओं की। रिफ्यूजी कैंप्स में स्पेशल होम्स बने, कुछ होम्स तो अभी तक चलते रहे, अभी 5-7-10 साल पहले तक चलते रहे, जो ये महिलाएं कोई दे वर अबडक्टेड, दे वर टेकन अवे, देन दे वर रिकवर्ड, फिर उनके परिवारों ने उनको। तो पार्टीशन, ये भी जानना बहुत जरूरी है कि पार्टीशन का जो सही रूप है, पार्टीशन का भयंकर रूप जो है, उसकी कीमत। सी देयर आर एग्जांपल्स ऑफ वुमेन बीइंग परेडेड, नॉर्थ वेस्ट प्रोविंसेस में, बड़े बड़े शहरों में महिलाओं को अबडक्ट कर, बच्चियों को अबडक्ट कर कर, उनको नंगा खड़ा कर कर उनको उनको बेचा गया, उनको सेल किया गया। लाहौर में तो एक ऐसा हॉस्पिटल बनाना पड़ा उन महिलाओं के लिए जिनके ब्रेस्ट्स को काट दिया गया। आप अनुमान लगाइए कि क्या बर्बरता थी ये, क्या किस प्रकार का ये समय था, और किस प्रकार की ये माहौल बना इन लोगों ने बनाया। तो ये पार्टीशन का जो आंकड़े बहुत है मेरे पास महिलाओं से संबंधित, मैं उस पर ज्यादा देर नहीं जाऊंगा। नाउ you see, when you look at the aftermath, the feeling has been that partition was flawed and it should be undone. तो ये चीज समझना बहुत जरूरी है कि उस जमाने की लीडरशिप, बहुत लीडर, कृपलानी, आचार्य कृपलानी जो कांग्रेस के अध्यक्ष रहे, वो तो काफी समय तक बात करते रहे। गांधी जी की हत्या जब हुई उससे कुछ रोज पहले उनकी एक, अगर शाम की बैठक में, when he gave his evening address, post prayer address, उसमें भी वो बात करते हैं। This feeling of re-merging, ये feeling बनी रही, पर obviously it had got too late, things got complicated। कई लोगों ने, डॉक्टर अम्बेडकर तो कहते हैं कि पार्टीशन को जिस ढंग से किया गया, it is the biggest blunder that we have committed। ये देश को इसकी लगातार सदियों तक इसकी कीमत चुकानी पड़ेगी, जो कुछ हद तक देखा जाए तो आज पूरा हो रहा है। तो ये कुछ 2-4 चीजें मैं आपको बताना चाह रहा था। इन सम I will conclude by just suggesting that what happened in 1947 was an unprecedented tragedy. It was a tragedy of monumental dimensions. We do not have another parallel in Indian history, or the world history rather, where in the time of peace we have suffered so much, where 15-16 million people have changed sides, and the violence, the nature of violence, keeping the limit of the time and other things in mind, I could have described the violence. It is difficult to describe. You cannot imagine in your wildest of dreams what happened in 1947. So we have this huge element of migration. unplanned migration. I told you that one of the most important thing that you must remember in partition is, in the story of India's partition is that the migration was not expected. And they allowed 16 million people, even a few days ahead. The first meeting to plan for partition takes place on 5th September. So you have the dimensions of the exchange of unplanned migration. You have the dimensions of the violence, the unprecedented violence. The third important point in sum that you need to remember, young students, young scholars from across the nation, you need to remember that the concept of partition was flawed. India was not a two-nation theory. The two-nation theory was not applicable to this ancient land. The two-nation theory drew its strength from political thinking. India was beyond. Sri Aurobindo and so many others, Bal Gangadhar Tilak used to say, that India, don't look at India through political vision. India is a spiritual land. India is a land which is rich in culture. It has a continuous, unbroken history of religiosity, spiritualism. Cultural ties have remained unbroken for centuries together. So many invaders came into India. So many foreign influences came into India. But the greatness of this country was it did not forget, it did not allow itself to be disconnected or uprooted from its ancient roots. So this is something you need to remember. So the two-nation theory per se was greatly flawed. It should not have talked of two nations because they believed in different faiths. India was used to this. And finally, the idea, the fourth point that I wish to emphasize as a concluding remark is that it was a serious, I'm not suggesting, I'm not doubting the intention of the leader. We are very ordinary people. These were great men, great minds who had sacrificed their lives. So it's not an aspersion on anyone. It's not an aspersion on the political system or the political leadership. But the fact of the matter is that India had fought a long drawn battle against the British. Why did we allow them to sit in judgment? You see, if you look at the reports of the time, in my book, my recent book, I've detailed this at length. It's like a chessboard. They're sitting in London deciding, oh, this will happen in Palestine, this will happen in Libya, this will happen in Egypt, this will happen in Burma. So it is a handful of officers sitting in London taking calls on behalf of India, and we are allowing them to do this. This is a point that we need to remember. I initially did not occur to me 35 years ago, but gradually I began thinking on these lines. Perhaps the biggest flaw in the story of India's partition, or in these critical years of 46, 47, was that we allowed someone who we had fought, the spirit of the freedom movement. Look at the history. I can see Vikram Sampatji on the screen. He's changed the narrative of Indian history. This is the best thing that could have happened to Indian history. His volumes on Savarkar. For once and all, we've got a definitive study. So what is Savarkar saying? Savarkar is saying that India is not meant for division. Forget about the fact that we are two nations in the terms of Muslims and Hindus. You are oversighting India's the spirit of this nation, which has evolved over centuries. What is Tilak saying? What is Sri Aurobindo saying? What is Bankim Chandra saying? He started saying this so much ahead. So we have defied the whole concept of nationhood, the whole concept of India's evolution as a nation by dividing this nation. And it was a flawed concept. Sadly, we allowed the British to do it. And as I said, that it was and finally, my concluding remarks would be that the partition of India did not carry with it the consensus of the nation. It was a decision taken by a few people, as I said, behind the veil kind of thing. And history sadly has overlooked this part. Give me one example, one constitutional body where it was debated. Apart from the All India Congress Committee on 14 June, of which I have just mentioned, the debate that occurs, it goes on the whole day. Gandhi walks out of the meeting. So this is the kind of temperament that is across party lines, irrespective of whether you're with the predominant party or not, you're against the concept of partition. With these words, I think I'll conclude that the partition of India was an unfortunate turn in our history. It was avoidable. Of course, we don't have any answers to this, but this is how it is. It is sadly, it has been kept out of the mainstream narrative. It is not, in the school textbooks of the, written in the 70s, there are 2 paragraphs. India's partition is finished off in 3 paragraphs. You have 16 million people. You have close to 750,000 or maybe 1 million people who have lost their lives. But we discussed this issue in 3 or 4 paragraphs in our textbooks. So that is what I started with, the narrative question. This is what I had in mind. And I'm glad that the organizers of this festival have drawn attention to forgotten histories and heroes. And of course, no better person than my co-panelist, Vikram Sampath Dr. Sampath, whose volumes I've enjoyed reading and brilliant. And he should really set the mark in this. And with these words, I think I'll conclude. Thank you so much. Mr. Bharat Jain.
Sir, on that, yes,
can I
on
deal
that note, thank you very much for the session.
Have I overstepped?
And I would request you to benefit of our audience. For the benefit of our audience, I would request you if you could just summarize this in a minute and a half, so that we'd be very grateful to you for that, please, sir.
All right. You see, in sum, what I have said is that the partition of India was a decision that flew in the face of India's evolution as a nation. It did not enjoy mass support. I have talked of flying in the face of India's evolution as a nation because India was never a two-nation concept. Every great thinker, every great philosopher in the last hundreds of years has noted this, starting from the Sikh gurus, our saints, and have traveled across this nation, speaking different languages, but at heart being the same. I refer to the Shankaracharya. So India was not a divisible nation. Partition was innately flawed. It was not a sound proposal. The two-nation theory was elitist in concept. It should not have been allowed. And then the price of partition was paid by the common man, whether it is the small-time peasantry, the small-time shopkeeper, and of course women, as I said. And partition was flawed because it was a decision that we left to the British to influence us on. I also drew attention to how the British had done great disservice to this nation by encouraging this concept of two-nation theory. We saw this happening in Kashmir. We've seen it happening in the context of India's partition. I think that should sum it up. Thank you. Mr. Jain?
On that note, sir, thank you so much. It was indeed a very enlightening account of partition and how it really charted the due course of this country today, and how we how the Britishers really decided about us, and how it really impacted our us back then, and where we stand today is all because of the partition. And that account has been beautifully delivered by you to our audience. So thank you so much, sir. It is a pleasure having you here, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and enlightening the youth of India to India's this piece of India's lesser known history. So we are extremely grateful to you for taking out the time and being with us over here today. And thank you so much. Now we'll yes, sir. And now we'll proceed further to the second part of the session, where we have our next presenter, who will be also taking us through India's lesser known histories and heroes. And he's been a senior research fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum Library, New Delhi. He is a national best-selling author for his two-volume biography on Veer Savarkar, and also another Indian historian who's going to shed some light on his life. Zordar तालियों के साथ please स्वागत कीजिए Dr. Vikram Sampath का, please. Can we have him on the screen, please? Over to you, sir. The floor is yours. Requesting you to unmute yourself, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Jain, and it was so wonderful to hear the last bit of Professor Tanwar's, speech. I've read his works with great delight, and it was wonderful. First time I'm actually meeting him, though through the online medium. So first of all, a very good morning to all the young friends, and hearty wishes to all of you on the occasion of the National Youth Day, and also Makar Sankranti, Lohri, Bihu, which is being celebrated, Pongal in different parts of India. I think that brings me also to one of the thrusts of my talk today about the unity in the concept of India, in the very idea of India, that hallowed term of idea of India. And I think one of the things that Swami Vivekananda had always stressed on is the entire idea of decolonization of the Indian mind. Because as that infamous rather, minutes of Macaulay of 1835, which stated that the very goal of English education in India was to create a class of interpreters between the rulers and the ruled, who were only Indian in blood and color, but in their tastes, in their opinions, in their morals, in their intellect, they would be English in their character. And I think that fundamental flaw that was embedded into our education system right in 1835 and carries on even now, it shows its manifestation in different spheres, whether it is the way our scholarship is shaped, or the way we look at our own country, its past, its heritage, and civilization, with that sense of being apologetic about ourselves, with a sense of being shameful about ourselves. And I think Swamiji's biggest thrust all the time was to come out of this colonial mindset, which is what he exhorted the youth of India to always do. So in the course of this talk, I will touch upon a few aspects of India's past, her history, which could be important, pointers into this very journey of decolonization. Keep talking about decolonization, but what exactly does that encompass, particularly for the youth of our nation? In way back in the British era, I mean, as a follow-up of what Macaulay had mentioned, you had a British administrator in charge of the imperial civil services, so training a lot of new civil servants, Sir John Strachey, who had very infamously declared in the 1880s, and I quote him, saying the first and the most important thing to learn about India is that there is not and there never was an India. So this whole idea, unquote, this whole idea that we were not even a nation, politically, everything that we were hammered together, literally stitched together from disparate parts, which had nothing common. We were all constantly fighting, squabbling amongst each other. And there was nothing uniting all of us. And it was only the beneficial British rule, ironically, and which gave us things like education, civil services, hospitals, railways, and of course, English education and all of that, which is what made us into a nation. That concept, which was drilled in our minds in 1830s, 1880s, sadly, somehow it has percolated and continued to remain with us even now after 75 years of independence. And I think that needs to be debunked at the very first when we talk of lesser known histories and heroes of India. So it's very important to distinguish. So while politically, of course, no country in the world, even if you look at America or any other Europe, no country in the world has had the same boundaries and the political territories as it has today. 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, America was welded just about 300 years before. So political nations or nation states always evolve, but the concept of a nation is much different. So while a nation state may be defined by strictly codified laws, by well-marked territories, a nation, on the other hand, is a shared sense of emotional well-being. And that is which transcends, which belongs to a common territorial as well as a cultural entity. And in this particular thing, we see that there is an amazing, convergence for more than 2000 years in the manner in which a very disparate set of historical commentators and observers have always seen a very, readily recognizable idea of India. We keep talking of idea of India, idea of India. So what was that ancient conception? What was that ancient idea of India? Now, from millennia, we've had an invocation, which is very common in traditional Hindu rituals to this date, where we invoke, the spatial sacred geography, Jambu Dvipa, Bharata Khanda, Bharatavarsha. So when anybody starts a ritual, he or she locates themselves into this spatial geography, which is sacred, which belongs in Jambu Dvipa, which is in Bharata Khanda, and Bharatavarsha, Varsha meaning, a country. And you have similar such countless references to this very shared emotional being in our epics, whether it is the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, or the Puranas, all of which have been collectively known as Itihasa, or history, as we know of the modern term, Itihasa itself translating to it thus happened. Now, in the Mahabharata, for instance, the 9th chapter, the Bhishma Parva, there are 70 verses, not one or two, but 70 verses, which a detail of Bharatvarsha, its geography and ethnography. It's probably the world's first and largest ethnographic project, where along with defining the contours, the boundaries of this spatial geography, the sacred land of Bharatvarsha, it also has in mind-boggling details all the various Janapadas, or the various communities of India. From the people of Kashmir and Gandhara and Punjab and Vidarbha, Malwa to Kashi, Magad, Bengal, Assam, and even down south to Dravida, Kerala, Karnataka, Kuntala or modern Telangana, and the Cholas in the Tamil country. And this gives like a panoramic view of India's geographical vastness and also her unity in spite of the diversity. And they talk about not only the different tribes in India then, like the Nishadas, the Shabaras, the Kiratas, the Adhiras, but they also, the Mahabharata talks about some of the outsiders who were there, who were known as the Mlechas and the Yavanas, the Greeks and the other outsiders. So today we talk so much about multicultural societies, cultural pluralism and all of that, but this was acknowledged in our country and her literature more than 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And that is something that we must acknowledge with great pride. Now, another important marker which talks about the concept of India, the idea of India, is the Vishnu Puran, whose date of composition, some people say it's 400 to 300 BC, some dated to the 9th century CE. What does it conceptualize again Bharatvarsha as? It says, and I quote from the Vishnu Puran, Uttaram yat samudrasya himadraschaiva dakshinam varshatad bharatam nama bharati yatra santati. The country which is north of the sea and south of the Himalayas is Bharata, and her children are called Bharati. It further goes on to say that this landmass spans over 9,000 yojanas from north to south. It has Kiratas, reference to the people of Assam in the east. It has the Yavanas or the Indo-Greeks in Greater Punjab in the west. So very clearly the geography is earmarked. It's north of the seas, south of the Himalayas, and also people form an important part of this idea of the nation, where on the east you have a particular group of people, on the west you have a certain group of people. So geography as well as people constituting the concept of a Varsha, a Bharata Varsha, and its children are known as Bharati. The Santati are called Bharati. So what more can there be an explicit, definition of what an Indian nation is? And still a lot of people today, including educated Indians, unfortunately buy into that same Macaulay and Strachey's, conception that there was no India, there was no country before the British came, which is again a hangover of the colonial mindset, which we must get rid of. Now, there was, as Professor Tanwar was also mentioning, that there was a concept of a common nation. And this common nation was a common unified sphere of cultural circulation. And I think that is best embodied by the philosopher Adi Shankaracharya in the 8th century, and 8th and 9th century, where the very choice of his movement, across India from his hometown in Kerala, on the 3 Digvijayas that he undertook, where he debated, discussed, and defeated several philosophers to establish the Advaita school of philosophy, it shows him responding to this very conceptualization of the Indian nation and what it means. So from Kerala, he literally went to every part of India and very rightly culminated it in Kashmir at the Sharda Peeth, which was then known as the Sarvagnya Peeth, or the all-knowing, Peeth. And his establishment of the mutts, the Peethams at the 4 cardinal directions of India, Sringeri in the south, Puri in the east, Dwarka in the west, and Badrinath in the north. That was not a coincidence. There again, it was the same invocation of the thought that the Mahabharata and the Vishnu Purana that I just mentioned, it was being put into action, where he was not a political leader. It was not his task to unite the country politically, but culturally and spiritually. Here was an invocation of that same idea of India and how all these different strands could be brought together into one common entity. Similarly, numerous other such examples. You have the 51 Shakti Pithas that are scattered across the sacred geography. You have the 12 Jyotirlingas, or the pan-India pilgrimages that our ancestors undertook. Now, they are just some of the few examples of a common civilizational memory which predated British colonialism or even the birth of the Indian Constitution, dare I say, in 1950. So the very fact that every geographical feature of India, be it our mountains, our forests, our rivers, our lakes, they were treated as sacred and considered as a place of pilgrimage. It was an attempt by our ancestors to do multiple things. One was environmental consciousness, where you had respect for your natural geography, also faith, which is inherent in any pilgrimage or so on. And interestingly, also patriotism. So a unique blend of environmental consciousness, faith, and patriotism coming together, probably seldom seen anywhere else in the world. And that there were so many sacred spots which were scattered across the length and breadth of India. It guaranteed a sense of expanded geographical consciousness too of what it means to be an Indian. And also it helped to prevent any kind of regional parochialism. So if I felt my part of the country was the most sacred, there were 100 other equally, if not more, sacred spots across splattered across the subcontinent. So it also prevented any kind of regional parochialism that people might have about your own part of the country. The next aspect that I would like to touch upon when we look at our history and its narrative is that the story of India is often told as that of her invaders. And from their perspective, and that too, we have never reclaimed it. So our history is told to us almost like a laundry list of a series of invasions, right from that myth of this Aryan invasion theory, which has been debunked time and again through recent archaeological discoveries, genetic discoveries, and all of that, to battles that we kept losing. I'm sure all of you in your history textbooks, when you've read the story of India, it will start with the invasion of Sindh, to the Battle of Tarain, to the Battle of Haldi Ghati, to Panipat Wars, to the Anglo-Maratha, Anglo-Mysore, Anglo-Sikh, the series of wars, a litany of wars where someone from the outside, whether it was the Arabs, the Turks, the Mongols, the Portuguese, the French, the British, every power of the world kept coming to India, and all that we did as a nation was to just meekly surrender, because we were so divided amongst ourselves on the basis of region, caste, creed, and all kinds of divisions, and we became a sitting duck for so many invaders. That is the normal story that is fed to us. But then, even Muhammad Iqbal, in that famous poem of his, said that kuch to hai ki hasti mitti nahi hamari. So what is that kuch? Why is it, if we are around today as a civilization, if we are still around where Greece and Egypt and Rome and all these other civilizations collapsed, and India is the only civilization that still survives, what is it that made us survive? Have we ever thought of that? Beyond, of course, our spiritual strength and resilience, there was also physical resistance that we put. It was not as if we took every attack, every invasion, meekly, merely surrendering and lying down. And it is very important that we as a nation remember these forgotten heroes and heroines of the past who gave that resistance, who ensured that, we put up that fight against anybody who came. And Abraham Lincoln had said, a nation that does not honor its heroes will not long endure. So for us to endure as a nation, we must remember and acknowledge these heroes and heroines too. So just a few names. I mean, there were thousands and thousands of them who put up this valorous fight of resistance. But we hear so little of them. We read so little of them in our history books, in our regular conversations. The heroic victories of someone like Lalitaditya Muktapida of the Karkota dynasty of Kashmir in the 7th century. Here was a man when the invasion of Sindh happened in the 7th century by Muhammad bin Qasim, and you had Raja Dahar there giving a spirited fight but ultimately capitulating. The Arabs never managed to capture the rest of India. They were confined only to the regions around Sindh, and they had to go away. Have we ever thought why was that? I mean, India was so lucrative; they could have easily expanded, through the length and breadth of India and taken it over. The reason was this man, Lalitaditya, who ensured that the Arabs were defeated black and blue, and they were literally pushed to the westernmost margins of the subcontinent, and they could never come back again. Rani Naiki Devi in Gujarat, who belonged to the Chalukya dynasty there, the Chalukya Solankis of Gujarat, being a woman, being a regent queen of her infant son. Here was Naiki Devi, who managed to defeat Muhammad Ghori when Muhammad Ghori came to Gujarat so badly, and he was so humiliated that he was actually defeated by a woman that he never dared to look at Gujarat again. So but I'm sure many of us, many of you would not even have heard of Naiki Devi or would have read about her in your school textbooks. Suhail Dev Pasi, about whom even the Honorable Prime Minister has made many a mention, where Suhail Dev in the Battle of Bahreich in today's Uttar Pradesh ensured that Muhammad Ghori's nephew was pushed back. And it took, so between the invasion of Ghazni and Ghori, there was a time span of more than 100 years. So why did it take again the Turks so long to come back to India when they had already tasted blood and they had already tasted easy success, or that, Ghazni could make 16, 17 invasions into India and found that we were a sitting duck. The fact were people like Naiki Devi, were people like Suhail Dev, who ensured that they thought 10 times before they could come back, because they knew that a resistance was being offered in this part of the world. Likewise, if you go down south, you had monarchs like Rajaraja Chola and Rajendra Chola, who ensured that, I mean, from today's Tamil Nadu, where they were focused at, with Tanjavur as the capital, expanding their empire all the way up north till the Ganges, to Bengal and Odisha and so on, to also Southeast Asia. You had the Cholan Empire, which went all the way to Srivijaya, Java, Sumatra, Indonesia, all of that coming under their, not necessarily empire, but through their maritime trade, through their control of the important ports that were part of the Cholan Empire. So these were, and today we see that civilizational outreach of India. We never conquered anybody. We never invaded. We never colonized another country. But we left our cultural imprint. We left our civilizational imprint on other nations. And that is what the Cholas did. Where even today, whether you see the Angkor Wat temple in Cambodia or in Thailand and Indonesia, where Indonesia, despite it being today a Muslim country, the airlines there is the Garuda Airlines. You have the National Theatre in Indonesia has the Ramayana, the Thai and Indonesian Ramayana ballets and so on. So the civilizational outreach that we've had, the Indian motifs, how they formed an important part of the fabrics in all those countries. All this was an impact of the Chola and the Pallava and other dynasties of the south, which had long association with this part of the world. Similarly, moving to further, eras of Indian history, people like Rana Kumbha in the 15th century. Do we know that, after the Great Wall of China, the second largest and longest wall in the whole world in terms of being an impregnable wall and fortress is the fort that was built at Kumbhalgarh by Rana Kumbha. Rana Kumbha was an invincible ruler of the 15th century in Mewar, the same dynasty which gave us great rulers like Rana Pratap, Maharana Pratap, and others. Rana Kumbha was never vanquished in any battle, and he managed to ensure the rulers of Malwa and Gujarat were all subdued, and he built this mighty empire which nobody could conquer. So again, seldom discussed. Many of us do not know about the Kumbhalgarh fort. I don't know how many of us would have even visited and seen this marvel that the Kumbhalgarh fort there is. What about coming down south? From the state I come from, which is Karnataka, you had someone like Rani Abbakka Chautha of Ullal, who in the 16th century defeated the Portuguese. Being a small little coastal town of Ullal, not once but twice, several times, the Portuguese fleet were thrown out of coastal Karnataka, and that's why they managed to capture only Goa and areas around Goa. They never managed to subjugate parts of coastal Karnataka. In the night, most of her, with very crude technology compared to the Europeans who had such amazing fleets, amazing technology. It was indigenous technology of taking the coconuts, which was so widely, available in coastal Karnataka, fitting something which could burn there and hurl these burning coconuts onto the Portuguese fleet in the middle of the night, thereby causing a massive damage, and thousands of Portuguese fleet caught fire and got destroyed. And the Portuguese ensured that they left the coast of Karnataka in a fright. Rani Abbakka. Similarly, if you go to the neighboring state of Kerala, Marthandavarma, again a very famous ruler there, who sadly remains famous only there and not known in the rest of the country. And the singular achievement of Marthandavarma, who belonged to the Travancore family there, was that he defeated the Dutch East India Company. So in the 15th, 16th centuries, we know that lot of European powers were trying to have competing claims over the Indian coastal waters, starting with the Portuguese, then you had the Dutch, the English, and the French. So the Dutch, when they tried to come and colonize parts of the Kerala coast, Marthandavarma gave them such a bloody fight in the Battle of Kolachal. This was in the 18th century, that the Dutch actually collapsed as a global power after that. That was the impact of the defeat that Marthandavarma gave to the Dutch East India Company. Now, how shouldn't Marthandavarma and his exploits, or Rani Abbakka and her exploits, be part of national discourse, be a part of great pride in which we are telling our future generations and ourselves that, as I said, we were not a nation of sitting ducks. We were not just taking all these invasions lying down. We were giving it back tooth and nail to everybody who looked at our country with a bad eye. Similarly, in Tamil Nadu, you had Velu Nachiyar, again the first Indian woman who actually led a campaign against the East India Company in the 18th century, allying with a lot of local chieftains and including the ruler of Mysore, Hyder Ali, and others. She managed to give a very tough resistance to the English East India Company. And in the Northeast, again, the Northeast of India is an area which we don't even talk about in the history of India. Our history of India is so centered around Delhi and all the kingdoms that ruled Delhi, even if they did not mean anything in the national imagination. Khiljis and Lodhis and Tughlaqs, whose contribution to this country is a big zero. We very religiously talk about their these kingdoms, who succeeded whom. We know it by heart. We know all the conquests and attacks. But vast parts of India, whether it is southern India or the northeast of India, we don't even have that in our national imagination of what Indian history is all about. So in the Northeast, you had, for instance, among several other bravehearts, once again in the 18th century, you had someone like Lachit Borphukan of the Ahom dynasty. The Ahoms ruled the Northeast for 600 years, from 1228 till 1826 or so. So in the 600 years, you had Lachit Borphukan, who gave such a, I mean, the Ahoms was such a military race that barring one small instance when Mir Jumla of Aurangzeb's army managed to capture part of western Assam, for which the Mughals had to pay a very heavy price. You had the Battle of Saraighat in 1671, where the Mughals were thrown away to the west of the Brahmaputra, and they could never again occupy Kamrup and Assam. So the Battle of Saraighat and the heroics of Lachit Borphukan are an exercise or an example of leadership skills, how to organize your army, and how in the David and Goliath fight, where you may be very inferior in terms of military strength, in terms of everything else, but still, if you organize yourself and if you make yourself single-mindedly focused towards your end goal, you can actually achieve that. So the story of Lachit Borphukan and of the Ahoms falls in this very category of heroism and leadership skills. So I think that is again something that is so underemphasized, and when we're talking about lesser known histories of India, these are very important. Moving now to the modern period, and of course the important idea of the freedom movement, which is the foundational concept of the modern Indian nation state. Now, there too, we have presented a very, very, very linear, very simplistic narrative of the Indian freedom struggle, almost like how it's a David Attenborough film, where one after the other, it's dominated by a very single ideological stance spoken in this the non-violent movement. But while the non-violent movement, the mass movement that Mahatma Gandhi and the Congress brought in this country was immense, its role was immense. What we should not forget simultaneously is the immense role, the phenomenal influence of armed resistance and the role of the revolutionaries. And this was there right from the early 19th century, which started initially, through tribal uprisings in different parts of India, in the Santals, in the parts of Odisha, in Bihar, Chota Nagpur, that area, and parts of southern India, the Rampa rebellion in different parts of the Godavari district. All these early tribal uprisings, Sannyasi rebellion, which happened in the late 19th century. But alongside the culmination, the big bang to the armed resistance was in the 1857 War of Independence, which is the first war of our Indian independence, as Veer Savarkar had called it. Not Sepoy Mutiny, as the British wanted to call it, and as I think several of our books even today call it as the Mutiny. But it is in effect the first major war of independence, where beyond just a few royal families who felt deprived that their throne was being captured by the doctrine of lapse, you had a mass uprising from Peshawar to Calcutta, which was based on this dual concepts of Swadharma and Swarajya. So Hindus and Muslims coming together to save both their faiths and also their kingdoms. So this 1857 War of Independence sparked out a series of inspirational series for several other revolutionaries and armed resistances. It started first largely in Maharashtra with people like Vasudev Balwant Phadke in the 1870s, and the Chafekar brothers, who actually assassinated a plague commissioner in Maharashtra, and later spread to other parts of India, largely Bengal, which became the hotbed of revolutionaries with numerous associations there, the Anushilan Samiti, Yugantar, Swadhin Bharat, all these organizations which had young men who were committed to the cause of total and complete liberation. And in Maharashtra, you had Savarkar and others who formed the Abhinav Bharat, again, a youth society, which was inspired by young people to campaign for a complete freedom for India. Now, at that time, the main voice of the Indians, the Indian National Congress, they were also not talking about complete freedom for the nation. But you had the revolutionaries who were actually in the early 20th century making a strong case for complete and total liberation of Bharat from all the colonizers. And the fire of revolution then, of course, from Maharashtra and Bengal spread to Punjab, and then Uttar Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, different parts of India got engulfed in this huge scourge of revolution. And for a long time, the first 2 decades of the 20th century, the Indian Revolution interestingly moved outside India and largely located out of Europe, whether it was London, whether it was Paris, Germany. These became important centers of the Indian revolutionary movement, when people like Savarkar, who went away to London to study, but along with that, organized a huge campaign for the liberation of the motherland. People, again, these are names which don't strike a bell in today's Indians or her young people. Shyamji Krishnavarma, who formed the India House in London as a place where all these people could come together and act together. Madam Bhikaji Kama, that heroic lady, who was the first Indian to go and unfurl the first Indian flag of independence at the International Socialist Conference in Stuttgart in Germany in 1907. Mind you, in 1907, a lady from Bombay, a Parsi woman, had the courage to overrule the British, restrictions, jump onto a table and unfurl the flag, saying, "From today, India is independent. We don't care what you do, but this is what we are committing ourselves to." Virendranath Chattopadhyay, Madan Lal Dhingra, people like this who were there, VVS Iyer, MPT Acharya, Sikandar Hayat Khan, several of these bravehearts, Sardar Singh Rana and others, who were in Paris, in London, operating for India's independence movement. And Lala Hardayal, who came from Delhi, who formed the Gadar Party. And the Gadar Party carried on transnational, intercontinental fights for the freedom of India, located in San Francisco in the US, in Canada, and then later Europe and Germany also came into the whole picture. In Southeast Asia, in Singapore, there were uprisings in the army against the British. So just imagine the scale. And this was a time when technology was hardly there. They did not have WhatsApp groups and so on to coordinate amongst each other. To have a coordinated attack on the British Raj. But despite these, whatever shortcomings that they might have had, here was a group of bravehearts who were willing to collaborate across different countries for the liberation of India. The 1920s, of course, you had the brave people who formed the HRA and later the HSRA. People like Sachindranath Sanyal, Ram Prasad Bismil, Ashfaqullah Khan, who led the Kakori case for freedom. And later, of course, Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, Rajguru, Chandrasekhar Azad, whose names would be etched in gold in the history of India's freedom struggle and of her revolutionary zeal. And later on, of course, the culmination of this entire armed resistance to India's freedom, coming through the efforts of two individuals, Rash Bihari Bose and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, whose formation of the Indian National Army, or the Azad Hind Fauj, shook the very vitals of the British Raj. And the very fact that we got independence was because of the insurrection in the army that these people created. The final nail in the coffin of British imperialism was what we call, sadly, we still call it the naval mutiny of Bombay, which happened in 1946. If the Sepoy Mutiny is called the first war of Indian independence, the naval mutiny should be called the last war of Indian independence, which happened in February 1946, and which ensured that there was simultaneous uprisings in the Royal Indian Navy, in the Indian Army units in Jabalpur, in Madurai, in different parts of India, which shook the British. Because time and again, the British knew that if there is an uprising in the army, then there is no hope for the British Empire. What happened in 1857? If there is a rebellion in the army, then there is no way in hell that they could hold on to the power that they had. By the end of the Second World War, you had about 2.5 million Indian soldiers in the British Indian Army, and they were controlled by, on the top, by about 40,000 British overlords. So just imagine if among these 2.5 million Indian soldiers, even if a small fraction, 5%, 10% of them were made to feel patriotic and they were disaffected and brought away to the side of the freedom movement, then the entire edifice of the British Empire would collapse. And this was the main philosophy of all the revolutionaries, that can we create disaffection in the Indian army? Can we seduce them to patriotism? Can we bring them to our side? And this was influenced by several Italian revolutionaries like Mazzini and Garibaldi, who had done similar things in Italy. So whether it was Savarkar, whether it was the other revolutionaries, this was their main focus as to how to get the Indian army to defect. And that is exactly what happened eventually with the INA, where several soldiers who were part of the British army. Mind you, the Indians did not have access to arms, so they could not be trained in arms. So the idea was to enter the army, train yourself in warfare, and then at a convenient time, defect over to the cause of freedom struggle, which is what these people did. And that petrified the British. They knew that there will be a repeat of 1857, which would lead to a mass carnage of Englishmen and women, like it happened in 1857. And so within a few weeks of the naval mutiny, you had the cabinet mission plan, which was sent to India to negotiate terms of freedom. And actually the British were to leave sometime in July, August of 1948. And much to the surprise of many people in India too, they left 1 year in advance because they just did not want to carry on with a place which was a tinderbox waiting to explode at any moment. So I think it is important that in the 75th year of our freedom, when along with the National Youth Day, we are also having the Amrit Mahotsav, which we are commemorating in this year, a very dispassionate assessment of all these multiple strands and the protagonists of our epic struggle for freedom, for liberation, I think is very, very important. And to have this awareness that there was more to the freedom struggle than what we are told, normally, while it is not to discredit or disparage the mass movement, which had its own very important role to create that sense, that consciousness of nationalism among Indians. But at the same time, the levers, the important factors that actually led us to our freedom are very, very different. And we need to talk about this more openly in India today. So in this talk, what I've tried to cover right from the ancient time to the modern times in a very short span is to paint this picture that we have always been, to summarize what I've tried to present today, we've always been, the concept of a nation has been very intrinsic in the cultural consciousness, in the minds of people. We may not have been politically one unit, but culturally, our thought of nationhood, our thought, the idea of India has been something that has been a part of the imagination of the ancients, has been a part of our conception of what Bharatavarsha and its Santati Bharati are. And in this long and arduous history of our country, stormy, tempestuous history, we've had numerous heroes and heroines from different parts of India, not necessarily one particular region, but scattered across the length and breadth of India, who have given a very tough armed resistance to the invaders, be it the Arabs, the Mongols, the Turks, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, the English. We've not been a nation of cowards. We've not been a nation of losers. We have been a nation of brave hearts who have stood up and given it back to the invader as good as we get it. And these stories of heroism and valor need to be celebrated and acknowledged. And finally, the other aspect that I tried to cover is on the freedom movement itself, that along with the mass movement of non-violence that we had a continuous and unending chain of armed resistance of the revolutionary kind, right from 1857's first War of Independence till the last War of Independence, the naval mutiny of 1946, where several brave hearts, both within India and outside India, managed to give a very bloody nose to the British. And it was this disaffection in the army, which is what eventually led the British to leave India for good and give us our freedom. We need to acknowledge these heroes. We need to acknowledge their bravery. And that is when I think the nation would move forward, because unless you acknowledge your ancestors who have contributed to the cause of nation building and nationhood, you cannot progress as a country. So once again, thank you so much for a patient hearing, and wish you all once again a happy National Youth Day and a happy Makar Sankranti. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for sharing this account of India's lesser known heroes and histories, and thank you for taking us to different times of history where we've come. I'm sure the youth is going to immensely benefit, and they have some questions which we've picked up. One young Indian youth says, he asks that, what is it one key takeaway point from these lesser known heroes in history in these present times to steer our lives?
One lesson, if it has to be.
Because I mean, back in those days, it was uncertain about freedom, and today we are from the point of Azadi again under COVID-19. So how can we steer our lives? What is the key lesson that we can learn from these lesser known heroes and that history? And because they said the history tends to repeat itself over time.
Correct. So as I mentioned, I mean, the common thread among all of them is leadership in the face of adversity. So today, I mean, global management schools come and give lectures on leadership skills and what leadership actually means. Obviously, a lot of the invaders had a better access to, warfare, better technology of warfare, probably superior military strengths. But despite that, as I said, the David and Goliath, the unequal warfare that was there, despite that, the very fact that a lot of these heroes and heroines managed to give a bloody nose to the invaders shows the skills of leadership. This shows the skills of heroism, of the way of organizing yourself in the event and then leading yourself to success and victory. So these are very inspiring stories which can form very important lessons even in the modern times as to, when we are faced with this difficult neighborhood even today, where there are invasions happening, there are incursions happening, all of that in our immediate neighborhood. How does India stand up, in the wake of that? We may be in some aspects inferior in some aspects of military strength, but despite that, that is not a marker for success. That is what the stories of all these people teaches us, that it is your strategy, your military acumen and your heroism which is what will lead you to success, not necessarily military strength and superiority all the time.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for addressing the youth of this country on account of this National Youth Festival. It's the 25th edition, and this was a session on India's lesser known histories and heroes. And we had Sri Raghuvendra Tawarji and Dr. Vikram Sampath present their views. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It is a pleasure having you here. And I pray for your well-being, and may this country learn a lot from you. Thank you so much. All right, friends, and well, on that note, it just brings us to the end of this session. Stay tuned for the next session with the theme, Can India's Indigenous and Ancient Wisdom Be Big Business for Indian Entrepreneurs? We'll see you in a couple of minutes. That session starts at 11:30, and stay tuned for it. We'll join you in a couple of minutes.